It was not directly my intention to become a statistician, but by virtue of having been assigned to the statistical office, I got to really appreciate and enjoy the work, and fully embrace it as time went on, right? But my training was in economics. I saw a real opportunity to get down to the details of how people live their lives, what was affecting them, and what their living conditions were, what their health conditions were, what educational opportunities or lack thereof was available to them, and sort of cover almost every aspect of their lives, how they spent their money, all right, and what their priorities were, how climate change impacted them, and all of these situations, right, flooding, you name it, and more recently, crime, health conditions, especially related to morbidity, and how it affected their productivity, the number of days lost, and so on. So all of these things, right, that affected how people lived, how well they lived, and my ability now to package and communicate that to the policymaker, right, to the governments, to international organizations, to ensure that the information was compatible with how this information was collected around the world, so that what we did would become appreciated was really a fascinating thing for me. I would say that, when you enter a field and you observe the strengths and the weaknesses, right? There was no continuous measurement of unemployment. I thought that needed to be a priority. Right, I set about correcting that situation as quickly as I could. We relied a lot at the time on mainframes when the computing world was moving towards laptop and microcomputers, right? Small, and handhelds, phones, right? Eventually, okay. And I was mid to late 90s. I was the only one going to a meeting with a laptop and being constantly called a nerd, and now everybody has embraced this idea as if it always existed. It didn't, right? Also the embrace of the internet. I remember that we used a phone line to connect into the internet, and we did it for like an hour a day or so, where we dumped our emails, and then I was actually interrogating the internet via computer programs. That was some of the most efficient ways to do. You write some lines of code, you send it to a service, and the service returned documents. Sometimes it returned the documents in pieces, and you'd have to recompile them, right? So there were all these changes happening, right? And I felt strongly that the statistics needed to be much better engaged with technology going forward to really have the impact that it should, given that, we were essentially in an information science, arena. I would say to explain our methodologies to policymakers so they would understand it. It is important that they continuously challenge it, because it does help you in how you compile information to be more thorough, to dot every I, cross every T, and so on. So there's nothing wrong with somewhat of an adversarial relationship with a policymaker. This is something that's actually very helpful. All right, but sometimes it goes a little too far in one direction, and that very often was a difficulty that we had. We'd say, well, this unemployment rate, for example, must be considered to have plus or minus 2% of error when we publish it, right? So let us wait for more consistent developments on unemployment for us to make categorical statements about what has happened. Or with respect to the GDP, the GDP is not entirely an issue for the statistical office, right? So very often when people think about statistics, they think, oh, it's the central statistical office. That is not the case. There is a whole network of institutions in the society constantly producing information. There are private sector firms, there's the mom and pop shop, there's the rum shop, okay? They are all engaging in economic activity, which you have to measure as a statistician. All right, some of these activities are opaque to you, that's true. But it is through the Inland Revenue Department, it is through the Customs Department when they trade with overseas entities, right? It is through the Registrar's Office when people get registered for births, for deaths, marriages, that you see what's a lot of what is happening, in addition to when you interact with them directly as households, right? So I think that needed to be better appreciated. It was not the statistical office all the time that needed to produce all the information required. Everybody was producing information. They also need to share it more with the statistical office, right? To engage the statistical office more when there are queries, and to be part of a statistical system, right, that the statistical office can harness in its publications, right? So those are some of the areas where we had some difficulty. I think there has been progress, but there's still a lot to do. I've had the opportunity to interact, advise, support almost every statistical office in the Caribbean, right? Whether it's in poverty measurement, in measurement of household expenditures, right? In many different areas, climate change surveys and what have you. Okay, so I think for the next census, the next census is going to be one of the major information challenges we're going to be experiencing. So I think there's an opportunity to fully make this operation fully digital, electronic, right, and cloud enabled. All right, so that all our questionnaires should be on tablets or available via the internet. Where there are hard to reach populations in gated communities, we can send them links to their addresses within the community and have specific enumerators follow up with people where they have concerns about crime or anything like that, right? So I think that the conduct of the next census to leverage, for example, Google Maps and other even more accurate satellite maps, right? That will allow us to create a new information platform. That's what the census does. It creates Census 2020-21 will create a new information platform on all persons within the population, right? And we have to do it well. We have to fully geo-enable it. Make sure that every building has a GPS location. make sure we get up-to-date descriptions of where people live, right? And all of that. So all of that can be, a crowdsourcing operation that makes us much more visible to the rest of the world at the aggregate level, how many of us there are, right? What communities we live in, how big our communities are, how big our households are, and so we can see the population a lot better, and we can plan for the population. So that's the census. Okay, that's a big activity which I hope that everybody will fully engage the statistical offices to participate in. But there's also a lot of other areas. For example, the building of business registers. The register of our businesses at the Central Statistical Office needs a lot of support from the system, from the Inland Revenue Departments, from the National Insurance Corporations, right? And some of these agencies also need to talk to each other better. One real big concern I have is that the employer focus of the National Insurance Corporation is incompatible with the enterprise focus of the Inland Revenue Department, and that has to be corrected. Okay, they both need to understand and talk the same language and figure out how to ensure that they connect up properly so that we don't have any sort of duplication. Well, 3 or 4 employers are one enterprise and that sort of thing. Okay, so there's that. There's the customs data that needs to be improved through, like improved situations with, how brokers value things and how they submit forms to the customs department, because the statistical office collects this information, right? We see the exports, we see the values they put there. When they put in incorrect values for exports, we go and tell that to TIPA, right? The Export Promotion Agency. And the Export Promotion Agency is looking at these exports and wondering what has happened, right? Because they cannot plan for export promotion when there's erroneous export data submitted, right? We are just a pass-through in that case, right? So a lot of these institutional problems needs to be better. We need to focus on them, right, within the whole statistical system to improve it. I think we can do a lot better in that area. I think also we need to deploy more of the available tools. Okay, for example, deploying the use of blogs for analysis of our data, deploying the use of Facebook and Twitter on a more regular and scheduled basis when we have major releases, like for example releases on inflation, on unemployment, on the GDP, maybe highlighting specific points that are interesting that people should remember. When there is any policy discourse, they will be better informed about what is happening. Okay, and generally in terms of the structure of the statistical system, to have much more regular publication of information. For example, in Saint Lucia, we transitioned from doing annual to quarterly national accounts, okay, and we haven't quite transitioned to releasing these on a regular cycle, quarterly, like we do, say, for the unemployment releases, which comes almost within 1 or 2 months after the end of the quarter, almost without fail, right? So it's always there to inform, and we should have a similar level of engagement in terms of the releases that we do with respect to GDP. I think we can certainly do that with inflation measurement, data on trade, that's always available. Okay, so I think there's a lot there to let people know about, right? Our demography is another big one, how people are aging. That's a huge issue, right? Because our population is basically flattening to declining, because we have children are becoming relatively more and more scarce, right? So you have all these issues, right? And there's a lot of information there. Data science, statistics is and the fact that you can build upon statistics and data science, you can build artificial intelligence systems on that basis, is the new wave for the future. Information science, okay? That is the wave for the future. There's no question about it, right? So that statisticians are very well placed either to be sidelined if they don't take advantage of the opportunities that are available, or to participate fully in it. And that's what I hope will happen. During my tenure, I tried to develop, for example, better methodologies for the conduct of the census. Okay, in 2001, we introduced scanning technology and handwriting recognition, okay, on paper census forms at the time. So that was so much so that the Central Statistical Office of Trinidad engaged me through the government of Saint Lucia and FAO to go to Trinidad to deploy the technology there, right? And so they bought scanners and all of that, and that was because what I tried to do is to shorten the time between the conduct of the census in the field and the delivery of census results. That period of time was very often 5 years and a lot of ridiculousness, right? So I tried to cut it. I think in 2001, through the use of scanning technology, right, we cut that down to about 1.5 years. By 2010, we cut that down to about 7 months. Saint Lucia delivers the census results within 7 months of completion of the census, right? That is, and the next time, right, we have been working on tools, tablet computers, right, that allows for much more instantaneous access and inputting of data on mobile devices, on phones, to allow the delivery of the census within 1 or 2 months of its completion, and to get everything electronic and georeferenced. So that I think was one passion of mine, right? Cutting down on the time for the delivery of information. That also happened. I also worked a lot on labor force surveys, right? Moving them from being biannual in the 90s to quarterly from 2001 up to today. They are now quarterly. Okay, so we deliver on a much more regular basis these unemployment results. And the whole establishment of that survey framework was something, you know, I felt pretty proud of. Okay, I also worked a lot on poverty measurement, and more recently on multidimensional poverty measurement, based on the work by Professors Al-Khairi and Foster. Okay, so they were the chief methodologists, you know, in Washington and Oxford, that developed these methodologies, and we deployed them within the labor force survey. We deployed them in 2016 in the household budget survey, okay, and we computed multidimensional poverty indicators, which are available now for use. So that was, for me, the measurement of monetary poverty, the improvement of that type of measurement, and the measurement of multidimensional poverty, okay, better understanding living conditions, the better integration also of sustainable development goals indicators that measure the targets, and the targets in turn are what the goals are trying to achieve. Okay, so the statistician have to see whether there's validation to whether we can provide validation that the targets have been achieved. Okay, so the politicians set the goals, set the targets, and the statistician goes out and measures what happened in a consistent way. All right. Now, we're not interested in making any politician happy. That is not our job. We want the objective truth, and that is what we. And sometimes there's always a sort of a difficult and uncomfortable relationship between a politician and a statistician. All right, because sometimes the information may seem to make them look better, sometimes not so much. All right, but I think it's better always to put information out, know what you're dealing with, and use that to set your policy framework. So I think that those are some of the areas. I spent a lot of time also on inflation measurement, right? So much so that sometimes I do stints to African countries and Southeast Asian countries to advise on inflation measurement, right? Because I've spent a lot of time in terms of software development for inflation measurement, but also for looking at the nuances of what are the best computing platforms, methodologies to implement to better measure price inflation, right? What people see at the supermarkets to tell the nation every year, every quarter, your prices have increased by 2, 3, 4%. In some African countries, this is a huge issue, much more than it is here. For example, I had resolved an issue in Sierra Leone where they had 2 CPIs. The CPI was so important, they were measuring it using 2 different processes. We had to merge the processes and figure out which one to stop and then which one to carry forward, because it needed to only have one. Otherwise, there's conflict and debate about which one is right, which one is wrong. So inflation measurement is another thing that I spent a lot of time doing, and in fact now we're building a new software for inflation measurement, and I hope that we have started adopting it at the Central Statistical Office in Saint Lucia, and we've discussed it a lot with other agencies in the region. All right, so these are some of the areas, measurement of consumption expenditure, living conditions, poverty measurement, looking at the labor force survey, and the measurement of unemployment. All these are conditions facing people. Prices, the GDP was not my main area of expertise, but I certainly supervised it for a long time. And also trade between Saint Lucia and the rest of the world. What are our terms of trade? Are they improving? Are they deteriorating? What is happening exactly? So there are so many interesting areas of statistics, right? And they very much always very often connected, So I think also making that connective tissue work. Another area I've also taken a lot of interest in is in spatial information and how it ties into the statistical system. Geography is a big deal. It's where people live, right? When you see a Google map, can you encircle the buildings and tell how many people are living there? What's the average household size? What's the level of poverty? What sort of unemployment is in this area? If you need to make an intervention, you need to know these things about these communities, right? So these are some of the things that I paid a lot of attention to, and I think I have made a contribution to, and I fully intend to continue making contributions in that area. Everything is not settled yet, right? Everything is not settled yet, but I expect to be providing advice where it is sought and sometimes where it's not sought. Okay, if I think it's required, I will certainly provide it. I have also been working with a number of African countries and I have a mission to Pakistan that's coming up to look at their price systems, right? So I do some work with the IMF. I do some work with the World Bank. I train people to do labor force surveys around the Caribbean, to do better labor force surveys, to transition the labor force surveys onto tablets. I work on climate change surveys, things of that nature, designing samples, making sure that the samples that we draw are consistent with the population that they are drawn from. Okay, so your sample is a low-cost way of getting information about a population, but that sample needs to be properly drawn. Okay, I think that the OECS regional strategy for statistical development is definitely something that is necessary. We set out a plan, but we have to be diligent about fulfilling the objectives laid out in that plan. Funding it, seeking funding for it if it's not available, but certainly focusing on that. All right, there are also many opportunities for synergies between the countries. We do it, okay, maybe we need to do it more systematically. For example, we do a census, we do household budget surveys, we pick a few countries where we do pilots, we come out with a model questionnaire, and we sort of did that, we sort of led that process, I would argue, right, with respect to the current household budget survey that the CDB has been responsible for in the Caribbean region, right? It's true that it's a Caribbean-wide effort, but certainly a lot of work was done in the OECS to take that first step for the region in that aspect, and a lot of countries within the region have benefited from our sort of collective action in terms of the measurement of poverty through the use of the household budget survey. Okay, so I think processes like that can be fully embraced by the RSDS. Okay, also countries, the RSDS should serve as the main blueprint by which to customize a version for each country, right? And each country is different, so they will have certain peculiar needs. For example, Montserrat may not bother doing as many surveys and may do a census every 5 years because the size of the country, right? St. Vincent and the Grenadines have the Grenadines, so therefore whenever you measure them, there's always this challenge about the Grenadines, right? St. Kitts and Nevis is two separate entities, okay? And that has to be recognized in how the statistical system is set up. So these nuances all have to permeate to the regional strategy, and in every area, every domain of statistics, I think you can have a development path which the regional statistical strategy can lay a blueprint for, and that we can follow diligently and fulfill the objectives within the strategy, right? That's the main thing. Yes, we have an objective, but we need to fund it. We need to have specific actions that we take to fulfill it. All right, we're going to improve customs data. We're going to engage customs. Then we want to have a process for doing that is laid out in the strategy. So an international agency wanting to provide support can see what that strategy is, can comment on it, can help us improve it even. And we need also to ensure that it's dynamic, because we are in a world where technology is changing. I was just in South Africa doing a workshop with 19, there were 19 countries at that workshop. I was doing, myself and Derek Budd from the UK statistical office was making presentations in that workshop. And one of the things that came up right on the spot was about the quality of customs data. We were discussing it in a fair bit of detail, and it appears to us that with a lot more barcode technology available, right, the use by customs of scanners and the labeling of packages in terms of the quantities and the values associated with that package through the use of barcodes and all these things can significantly enhance the quality of the data at the customs department, right? So these are the sort of things that will make the regional strategy more dynamic, because it needs to take on board these new ideas as they happen. There's a technology, for example, in tablet computers, even now, in one of our software programs that allows you to take a picture of a building, and it will bring into the tablet the specifications of the building, how tall it is, right? How tall the windows are, how big they are, and all of these things, just by taking a picture, right? So that is an artificial intelligence technology that is now being built into these tablets. So there's so much more information you can get. We have, for example, the recording of a few interviews to allow for higher quality interviews to be done. We can do it almost on an ad hoc basis. So people like enumerators know they're being monitored. They are at a location. We get the GPS location of that interview, where they're doing it. So you cannot say a statistician or an enumerator went under a tree and completed a questionnaire on paper, and we did not know where they were. We knew exactly where they were, and we could record the interview. So that information is legitimate. There's no question about it, right? And that's what we want to tighten up through the use of technology. And you see that dynamism, the RSDS can embrace that going forward, will help a great deal. My advice to younger persons who are becoming statisticians: I hear you loudly. I always, my staff very often accuse me of always aligning with the younger ones as they came through the door, right? In so much so that in the last 2 years, when I saw, looking at some of the youngsters coming out of university, newly trained, much better skills, right, than even our current crop. I mean, I don't want to, but that's a fact. They are better educated, okay? And so I actually did a course with Johns Hopkins University to understand our programming. Why? Because what I was seeing coming out of university was a lot of people who had done our programming, who understood data visualization, who understood connectivity to the web, all right? They understood a lot of these new and developing areas, okay? So I'm saying that yes, to the young people, definitely broaden your skills in data science, okay? You have all these computer applications now that embrace data science, that embrace artificial intelligence, that embrace statistical modeling, all right? So certainly learn all these tools, and the statistical offices would, at least I would say, should, or even if they want to survive, must embrace you, right? And I think you will get more and more opportunities to deploy these skills within even non-traditional areas, within firms, because marketing is a big deal, and marketing increasingly is dependent upon on canvassing information from websites, right? What they call scraping. Okay, and these are technologies that a lot of our younger information science professionals have come to the table with, all right, and are learning. And statistical offices, we have to embrace it, otherwise we will lose their interest and we will be the worst off for it. As we have more and more statistical development in the region, a lot of truths about the population will come to light. We have been comfortable with a certain basic set of information, but there's new information coming to light. Okay, we have to learn to embrace it. Our policymakers have to be more comfortable and open with knowing the real situation. They have a responsibility to ensure that the statistical service operates optimally, so they can certainly bring in a professional, well-credentialed statistical professional to review our processes, to give us advice to make it better. But they should try, as our politicians, our policymakers should try as much as possible to embrace good information when it's available, all right, and use it to strengthen their policy making environment. Okay, I don't think they should treat it with as much fear as they have in the past. I think, and they are showing a lot of promising signs of embracing good information when it is made available. And they also should seek to promote it by a sort of hands-off supervision of the process, to provide advice to improve it over time.